Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We have a really fascinating one today.
We really do, because, usually when a local municipality like a city or a town is struggling with sudden population growth, the conversation is just incredibly dry.
Oh, absolutely. It's all zoning laws and spreadsheets.
Right. You're looking at water treatment plant capacity or, I don't know, trying to find the budget to hire a few more translation teachers for the school district. It is purely administrative.
Yeah, it's the tedious day-to-day friction of resource allocation. I mean, they are real problems, certainly, but they're solved in city council meetings with clipboards and calculators.
Exactly. But overnight, that exact same spreadsheet problem can just mutate. It stops being about city planning and suddenly morphs into a national headline about stolen pets, skyrocketing diseases, and a military invasion.
It escalates so quickly.
It really does. And today, we are looking at the exact linguistic blueprint of how that happens. We are putting the rhetoric of figures like JD Vance and Donald Trump under a microscope.
And we should probably pause here for a second, just to be very clear about our goals today.
Yes, thank you. This is a crucial step. Let me just lay down the ground rules for you listening right now. Because the source material we are looking at analyzes politically charged rhetoric, we need to make it crystal clear that neither of us are taking any political sides today.
Right, zero political endorsement here.
Exactly. Our mission is not to endorse or condemn any viewpoints or any politicians, left or right. This is an objective, purely analytical look at how political narratives are constructed.
Yeah, we're looking at the architecture of the language itself. We want to understand how an administrative bottleneck gets weaponized to trigger a very specific national reaction.
So keeping that purely analytical lens, why migration? Why does this specific topic catch fire so easily?
Well, migration is uniquely vulnerable to this kind of narrative engineering because it's just inherently complex.
Right.
It overlaps with everything, infrastructure, the economy, the law, and obviously national identity. And that complexity makes it the perfect raw material for populist mobilization.
Because there are so many moving parts you can lash onto.
Exactly. So to really understand the mechanics at play here, our deep dive is going to separate four things. First, what was literally said. Second, what facts can actually be checked. Third, how experts evaluate those facts. And finally, what function that language actually serves.
Okay, I love that framework.
Right.
Let's anchor this in a very specific recent reality. Let's talk about Springfield, Ohio.
Good example.
Yeah, because there is zero debate that Springfield was facing actual municipal strain. You had a city of roughly 60,000 people, and over a short period, an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 Haitian immigrants arrived.
That is a massive demographic shift for a town that size.
Huge. The local clinics, the housing market, the administrative services, they were legitimately overwhelmed. I mean, even Ohio's Republican governor, Mike DeWine, had to step in to provide state support for local healthcare and law enforcement. So the structural friction was completely real.
It was, but the analytical question here is not whether Springfield had infrastructure problems. We know they did. The question is how those problems were narrated to the rest of the country.
Right, the story told about the problem.
Exactly, because a politician basically has a choice, right? You can describe the situation as a complex integration challenge that requires federal funding.
Which is boring.
Very boring. Or you can frame it as proof that a specific, ethnically marked group brings inherent chaos and destruction.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because we see that pivot so clearly in the rhetoric. JD Vance posted on, formerly Twitter, about, quote, Haitian illegal immigrants who are generally causing chaos all over Springfield, Ohio.
And those word choices are very deliberate.
Oh, absolutely. To use an analogy, it's like looking at a leaky pipe in a house, right? And instead of calling a plumber, someone grabs a megaphone and tells the neighborhood that the water has a conscious plan to destroy the foundation.
That is a great way to put it. Because that shift, moving from a technical problem to a moral failing, that's a sociological mechanism known as othering.
Othering. Okay, break that down for us.
So when Vance uses the term illegal, he isn't making a strict legal categorization. He is applying a moral marker.
Wait, so it's not about the law at all?
Not really, no. It turns a human being who has a very complex administrative status into just a walking rule break. It's othering. And when you look at the actual fact checks from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services...
Well, that's the federal agency that actually processes these visas, right?
Yes, exactly. They confirm a massive portion of the Haitians in Springfield were actually there legally. They were under temporary protected status, or TPS, as well as humanitarian parole.
Wow. Okay, so calling them illegal intentionally overrides their actual legal status. It just paints them as inherently illegitimate.
Precisely. And the rhetoric didn't stop at their legal status either. It moved very quickly into claims about public health.
Oh, right. The disease claims. There were these assertions that communicable diseases like HIV and tuberculosis had, quote, skyrocketed in Springfield.
Which is a terrifying word to use.
It is, but PolitiFact dug into the local health data, and those claims were rated mostly false. There was no dramatic spike, and there was certainly no causal link to the Haitian community. So, analytically speaking, why invent a public health crisis?
Well, because human beings are biologically wired to react to threats of disease. This actually goes beyond political strategy. It taps straight into evolutionary psychology.
So it's like hacking the brain's defense mechanism.
Pretty much. By deploying disease metaphors, you take a very heterogeneous, diverse group of people and you reduce them to a single biological threat.
You're no longer talking about needing more doctors in a local clinic.
Right. You are telling the public that these outsiders are physically dangerous to the community's body. And that visceral disgust response, it completely bypasses the rational data processing part of the brain.
That is so wild. But, calling something a disease in one city doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It really seems like it's part of a broader architectural shift in how we talk about borders nationally.
Oh, it is definitely a national trend.
Yeah, because if we trace Donald Trump's rhetoric over the last decade, we see this distinct escalation. Like, back during his 2015 candidacy announcement, he described the U.S. as a dumping ground.
Right, the language of trash and disposal.
Exactly. He said migrants from Mexico bring drugs, crime, and are rapists. But then fast forward to late 2023, and Reuters is reporting him using phrases about migrants poisoning the, quote, blood of our country.
The linguistic progression there is really striking.
How so?
Well, it moves from standard criminal associations, which are behavioral, right, into these deeply biological, contaminating metaphors. It frames the nation as a pure biological entity that is literally being infected.
Wow. And then by the 2024 campaign, the language just totally militarizes.
Yeah, it takes another leap.
We start hearing about an invasion of criminals. The United States is described as an occupied country, and there are promises of a liberation day.
Yes, the military framing becomes dominant.
There's even that proposed 2025 executive order, number 14165, which officially frames irregular migration as a large-scale invasion and an unprecedented flood of illegal aliens.
It puts the metaphor into official policy language.
But, okay, let me push back here for a second if I can.
Sure, go for it.
Because politicians use dramatic, militarized metaphors all the time, right? Like we've had the war on poverty or the war on drugs, or even corporate leaders complaining about a flood of emails or a flood of regulations.
True, it's a common rhetorical device.
So why is this specific use of invasion analytically or scientifically different from standard political hyperbole?
It's a great question. And it's different because of a concept developed by the Copenhagen School of International Relations. It's called securitization theory.
Securitization theory. Okay, what is that?
These scholars study how a regular issue is transformed into a literal security threat. What they point out is that using literal military terms like invasion or occupied isn't just colorful language. It is a structural speech act.
A speech act, meaning the words actually do something.
Exactly. When you declare a war on poverty, what happens? You build schools, you fund social programs. But when a political actor frames human migration as an invasion, they are moving the issue entirely out of the realm of normal democratic negotiation.
Right. You're taking it out of the space where we debate, municipal budgets or visa caps and tax revenue.
Precisely. You elevate it into the realm of existential survival. Securitization theory argues that once an audience accepts that a threat is an immediate existential danger to the nation's survival,
then all bets are off.
Yes. It justifies extraordinary, harsh measures as totally necessary self-defense. If you're dealing with a zoning issue, you use administrative policies. If you are fighting a literal invasion, you use force. You use mass deportations, military intervention.
So the language itself rewrites the rules of what is politically and morally permissible.
It completely changes the rule book.
That makes so much sense. But, securitizing the language is only half the battle. You can call something an invasion all day long, but if the public isn't paying attention, the strategy just fails.
Right. You need eyes on the story.
Exactly. Which brings us to how this narrative blueprint hits the modern media ecosystem. And, well, it brings us to the pets.
Ah, yes. The Springfield rumors.
The infamous, completely fabricated rumors that dogs, cats, and geese were being stolen and eaten by Haitians in Springfield.
Which were thoroughly debunked.
Entirely. Reuters, the Associated Press, the local police, the mayor of Springfield himself, they all debunked these claims. There's zero evidence, and yet it became the biggest story in the entire country.
It dominated the news cycle for weeks.
It did. And JD Vance later gave this incredibly revealing quote during a CNN interview about it. He said, "If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do."
No, he did try to clarify later that he meant creating media focus rather than fabricating the event out of thin air. But the underlying mechanism he's describing there is textbook agenda-setting theory.
Agenda-setting theory. I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it was developed by communication scholars McCombs and Shaw. The core premise is that the media doesn't necessarily tell people what to think, but it is incredibly powerful at telling them what to think about.
What to focus their attention on.
Exactly.
I mean, it makes perfect sense when you look at how we consume information digitally today. Like, imagine a 50-page municipal report detailing temporary protected status regulations.
Nobody is reading that.
Nobody. It's the equivalent of boiled broccoli. Nobody clicks on it. But a meme about a stolen, eaten cat, that is pure digital sugar.
Digital sugar, that's a great analogy.
It just triggers immediate outrage, humor, fear. It forces engagement.
Because the story acts as a Trojan horse. The political actor prioritizes the emotional hook to force the media to cover the broader topic of immigration. The actual truth of the specific story, whether a cat was actually harmed, becomes entirely secondary to its emotional utility.
Wow. So the truth literally matters less than the reaction it gets.
In this framework, yes.
But every politician wants to control the narrative, right? Like, how is this closed loop different from standard political PR or just spin?
Because of how it weaponizes the correction process itself.
Wait, what do you mean?
Think about it. When fact-checkers inevitably step in to debunk the pet rumor with actual police reports, what happens?
The politicians don't back down.
Right. The populist response simply pivots. They frame the fact-checkers and the mainstream media as these out-of-touch elitists who are trying to silence the genuine, localized concerns of the working class.
Oh, I see. So it creates an entirely closed communication loop.
Exactly. The narrative becomes completely immune to correction. The debunking itself is held up as proof of the conspiracy.
So fact-checking is no longer seen as democratic quality control. It's framed as an active suppression of the truth. That is wild.
It is a very effective strategy.
But this entire narrative structure, the disease metaphors, the invasion rhetoric, the closed-loop media strategy, it all crashes into a massive brick wall when you actually look at the empirical data over a long timeline.
Oh, definitely. The data tells a completely different story.
Yeah, and we aren't just talking about a few years of statistics here. There is this landmark study from the National Bureau of Economic Research that spans 150 years.
A century and a half of data.
From 1870 all the way to 2020.
Correct.
They tracked census and incarceration data across generations. And the findings.
The findings are definitive. Immigrants consistently have substantially lower crime, lower arrest, and lower incarceration rates than U.S.-born citizens.
Lower. Not the same, but actively lower.
Yes. And this holds true regardless of the decade, the origin country of the immigrants, or the economic conditions of the time.
150 years of data proving that the core premise of the migrant crime wave is just statistically false.
Completely false.
So my question is, why does the crime narrative stick so stubbornly to migration? If the data is so overwhelmingly clear, why is the public so eager to believe the exact opposite?
To understand that disconnect, we really have to look at the sociology of a moral panic. This is a concept developed by Stanley Cohen.
Okay, a moral panic. How does that work?
Well, a moral panic occurs when a complex, deeply systemic societal problem, like a severe housing shortage, wage stagnation, or the hollowing out of industrial cities, is projected onto a highly visible, vulnerable minority group.
And Cohen has a specific name for that group, right?
Yes, he calls them the folk devil.
The folk devil. Because, let's be honest, it is psychologically exhausting to be angry at a supply chain, or a zoning law, or decades of macroeconomic shift.
You can't punch a spreadsheet.
Right, you can't protest a spreadsheet.
Exactly the point. The human brain craves a tangible enemy. It is so much easier to rally a community against a visible folk devil than it is to explain the nuances of federal funding gaps.
That makes awful sense.
It also ties into what Ian Haney Lopez calls dog whistle politics. Politicians use language that sounds objective on the surface, appealing to things like security or law and order.
which sounds totally reasonable.
Right, but it is specifically coded to activate racial or ethno-national anxieties. If you repeat the association between a minority group and crime or chaos often enough, you forge a subconscious link in the voter's mind.
And that link just entirely overrides the actual crime statistics.
Exactly. The emotion beats the data.
I want you to pause for a second if you're listening and just imagine actually living in Springfield, Ohio, while this architectural narrative was being built on top of your town.
It must have been terrifying.
Because the fallout from this rhetoric wasn't contained to academic theories or Twitter algorithms. The consequences were physical and they were immediate.
Real-world impacts.
Yes. The Associated Press and local news reported that after these rumors went national, Springfield experienced dozens of bomb threats.
Dozens of them.
Elementary schools were evacuated. City Hall was locked down. The entire community was put under extreme psychological and logistical stress. Mayor Rob Rue literally had to go on national television and beg for peace and rest.
Just begging for it to stop.
Think about that. A community that was just trying to go to work, send their kids to school, and manage its local budget suddenly became a war zone in a national culture war. The everyday safety of a real city was sacrificed to fuel a national political narrative.
And that highlights the core human rights issue at the center of this kind of rhetoric. You see, recognizing human dignity does not mandate that a country must have open borders. A nation absolutely has the right to regulate its immigration.
Right, of course.
But human dignity does demand that political debates do not collectively devalue human beings. When a community that is largely working and living legally is suddenly criminalized and dehumanized by national figures, they face real, everyday physical danger.
The rhetoric literally turns neighbors into targets.
Exactly.
Now, I can hear some of you out there listening and thinking, wait a minute. Does this mean that wanting strict border control or worrying about the strain on local resources is inherently xenophobic or populist?
Absolutely not. And any serious analysis of political science makes this distinction very, very clear. A healthy, functioning democracy must debate migration. It has to debate border security, resource allocation, and integration.
It's a necessary conversation.
Totally necessary. It is entirely legitimate within a democratic framework to argue for highly restrictive immigration policies or to demand tighter border enforcement.
So the issue isn't the policy goal itself, it's the architectural delivery of the argument, it's the how.
Correct. Legitimate security rhetoric is precise. It distinguishes between someone holding legal temporary protected status and someone who crossed a border irregularly.
It deals in facts.
Yes. It addresses specific laws, identifies specific federal funding gaps, and targets specific resources. It operates in the realm of reality without resorting to collective scapegoating or relying on unverified internet rumors to just maximize panic.
So basically, you can stand at a podium and say, the asylum process is broken and cities like Springfield are drowning because the federal government hasn't provided the necessary infrastructure funding.
Yes, that is a legitimate political argument.
You can argue for mass deportations based on economic theory or national sovereignty. But you can do all of that without labeling legal residents as illegal.
Right.
And without claiming that they are spreading tuberculosis and eating the neighborhood pets.
Exactly. The true danger here, identified in the source material, is not conservatism. It is not the desire for strict borders.
What is it then?
The danger is the specific combination of unverified rumors, biological metaphors of disease and poisoned blood, and the deliberate securitization of local municipal issues to create an atmosphere of national emergency.
Because that combination just degrades everything.
It really does. It degrades a democracy's ability to reason based on facts. It replaces civic debate with a state of perpetual emergency.
Wow. This has been such an illuminating journey today. We've really seen how a very real, tangible local issue in Ohio was just entirely reverse engineered.
Yeah, piece by piece.
Through the mechanisms of securitization, agenda setting, and the creation of a moral panic, a dry spreadsheet problem became a national crisis narrative.
A fascinating, if somewhat alarming, process to map out.
Definitely. So to you listening, the next time you are scrolling through your newsfeed and you feel that immediate, visceral spike of anger or fear, I challenge you to look past the emotional hook.
Take a breath and analyze it.
Yeah. Ask yourself, what work are these specific words doing? Is this politician explaining a complex problem to me, or are they just building a folk devil for me to hate?
Because that level of analytical distance is really the only defense mechanism a citizen has against engineered outrage.
Well said. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over Building on all of this, we talked today about how political actors, create stories to force the media's hand, entirely bypassing actual data for maximum emotional impact.
Right, Vance's strategy.
Exactly. But think about this going forward. As we enter an era of artificial intelligence and deepfakes, where creating a hyper-realistic, completely fake story takes only seconds.
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
What happens to our democratic debate? If a completely fabricated, low-tech text post about pets can result in bomb threats and shut down schools in Ohio today, how will our society tell the difference between a real infrastructure problem and an existential invasion tomorrow?
Especially when the photographic and video evidence itself can be generated on demand.
Right. If someone hands you a megaphone instead of a wrench to fix a leaky pipe, you have to ask who benefits from the noise. Something to think about. Get you on the next deep dive.